This week seemed to feel a little harder to get through 2 albums a day. I'm not sure if it's the extra time or effort going into the videos, or documenting everything, or I'm just tired of the winter. Well, I started this week off with Planes Mistaken for Stars. I realized how neatly this record fits into that late 90s screamo lane. The guitars carry that Midwestern melancholy, but they push harder than the more delicate side of that scene. The vocals sound strained in a way that you can feel real pain, not just theatrics. And honestly, you can hear why parts of their catalog ended up on No Idea Records. There's grit in all of the edges, but it's still controlled. The album isn't trying to escape any of its inspirations. It embraces them and takes the next logical step forward. Now, Shook One's slaughter on the insole is not subtle about its Lifetime or Jawbreaker influences. The phrasing, the pacing, even the guitar tone sits in that space. It feels so close that at times you're almost expecting a different voice to come in. What holds it together is conviction. It plays like a band that grew up studying that language and decided not to translate it. And the EP format helps. It's sharp, it's direct, and it doesn't linger. And next up from my top picks is None More Blacks, File Under Black. Jason Shevchuk's presence brings Kid Dynamite into the room immediately. The tempo shifts are familiar, the hooks are familiar. Dinner for Suckers opens in a way that almost feels like a lost Kid Dynamite session. In the end, the difference is less about style and more about intensity. This album is slightly more measured, slightly less chaotic, but the DNA is clear. When you compare this album to the leap from Lifetime to Kid Dynamite, it raises the question of how much space there is between continuation and it just merely being repetition. Now, Texas is the Reason's early EP, that lands differently. I've lived with the LP for years, so hearing this felt less like discovery. It was more like something familiar but a little different. The production has a bit more thickness, but the restraint you know them for is still intact. There's a familiar patience in all of the songwriting. It doesn't oversell emotion. It lets chords just sit. It reminds you just how tight music from that era can be when it wasn't just trying to rely on emotion. Cold World's No Omega shifted the texture. The guitars are looser, fuzzier, and less concerned with that surgical tightness than a lot of modern hardcore that I'm used to. It feels slightly unstable in a way that sets it apart from the more polished hardcore records of the time. The intro alone just sets a mood. It's about atmosphere. It drags you in before you have any time to analyze it. And then there's Dr. No's Nardcore Hardcore. I went in expecting something that might lean towards jazz, or at least something a little further removed from Bad Brains. Instead, it comes out swinging in a way that almost feels too familiar. The guitar work evokes those early Bad Brain tones so closely that you can almost layer their old lyrics over these riffs. It's well recorded and technically solid, but the resemblance becomes too hard to ignore. It feels like stepping back into a room in Chernobyl that's been preserved exactly as it was in 1986. And here's the crazy thing. Dr. No is just the band name. This isn't a side project from Bad Brains' guitarist. Honestly, I rounded out the week with a lot of great music, and a few albums that were a bit of a letdown. The Beach Boys' We Got a Groove reissue of Love You adds to the original, 35 alternate tracks and demos around a record that was already divisive. I mean, the material does show Brian Wilson back in the driver's seat, but the weight of the catalog is still hanging over it. The alternates are interesting as documents, but the core album remains completely underwhelming. It feels less like a reinvention and more like a failed attempt to regain relevance. And Johnny Cash's songwriter carries a similar tension. These demos predate the American recordings era, and you can hear why some of the material resurfaced later. Some of the songs feel almost too comfortable, as if they're walking through arrangements that had already found their final form decades ago. That familiarity isn't accidental, but honestly, it could be its biggest failing. Going back even further, Elvis Presley's debut surprised me. I've mostly known Elvis through compilations, so sitting with that 1956 album front to back was long overdue. The production was way tighter than you'd expect for somebody's first album produced in 1956. It doesn't feel like a loose collection of early rock singles. In fact, the tracks I wasn't familiar with probably added more depth to the album than I anticipated they would. Wizzo's Urag brought back the skate punk memory tied to survival of the fattest comps. The speed is intact, and it still has that metallic edge that keeps them from feeling dull. It's aggressive without sounding sloppy. It lives comfortably in that 90s skate punk era without ever straying too far from the formula. I also checked out Ghost's prequel. The production is huge, the hooks are engineered with precision, and the references to arena metal are obvious. Faith lands with a chorus you can sing almost immediately. The nods to Motley Crue end up sitting just below the surface. It's polished to the point where nothing feels accidental, for good or ill. It's metal designed for wide reach without shedding its theatrical core. A formula that's held true all the way back to Kiss. On paper, Yob's Our Raw Heart felt like the outlier this week. The riffs are massive and slow, the production is warm, expansive, and it's never brittle. The big surprise was the clean vocals that cut through the distortion in a way that feels organic rather than forced. It stretches the doom sound without abandoning it altogether. It respects the form while testing how far that form can be pushed. Across the week, I added 14 records, bringing my total up to 106 albums for the year. I have to do a bit of catch up this week on my Substack and get all my written reviews posted, but I would love to hear what you're listening to right now, or what you think I should listen to next. I've linked my list and my Substack into the comments if you want to dig deeper into what I've been listening to. And honestly, I loved hearing from people about their stories with albums and bands I've reviewed. So I would love it if you liked this video and subscribed. I know everybody says that in their videos, but it really does make a difference, and it helps show my videos to other people.